will be a description of how Quickdraw can use multiple color palettes and how you can keep track of color identification strings independent of just the RGB color content. Now in this particular case, I'm going to start out with a blank color palette. So I want to start out black and I want to give black a name. So I've got a simple editor that allows me to type that name in. And when I drag black back to there, and if I go to white, so I can then do that and as many other colors as I want to drag in. And since you deal with too many changes in names on, so now I can also go in and I've got access to the Broussard color palette here. If I want to drag between an existing color palette and a new one, for example, if I want to pull that to mauve pale, if I want to drag that across, I can add that color to this palette. And from now that will always have that nomenclature associated with it. And the same thing, I could drag a yellow across. So I've now got multiple colors, each with its identification of what color name it is. And if I do a mouse over those, you'll notice the mouse over text at the bottom will tell me that color. It will tell me the nomenclature of that thread, as well as if I click it, it will show me the full RGB with the text, and I can edit it here. Now the other places that same information can appear, let me go back in, and if I look at the warp pattern, and if I tell it I want it, I've got the warp selected, so if I ask for the purple, again, the mouse over text down at the bottom of the page, right now it's telling me color ID black to white, pale, and yellow. So this tells me the name of the color palettes, and if I want to actually look at what color a thread is, I can select that, and it tells me the thread color from the palette. If I want to look at that in a different way, this is the Lunatic Fringe palette. And if I go back in and look at the text, and if I look for the warp colors, for example, again, when I do the mouse overs, each color in the palette, it's a small text, but it's going to show me the text string of what that means. And again, as I hit the right mouse click, it's going to show me the RGB color as well as the manufacturer's identification tag that's been typed in for it. So I can kind of merge those around, and I can see what color all the palette colors are as well as each thread in the pattern. And the other place that can come out, if I go back over and look for threads, again, if I look at the palette colors here, the palette colors are going to show up in the mouse over box at the bottom. When I ask for the threads, it's going to tell me each thread and how many threads, since this pattern has one thread of each color. It's going to show me one thread of each. And if I hit that, copy that to the clipboard, let me look what that looks like in raw text. It gives me that same information, but it's now also added at the bottom, and it's going to tell me the first thread, there's the RGB content, and there's the manufacturer's ID tag that I typed in. So for each thread that I'm actually using in the pattern, it's going to tell me the thread color, and it's going to tell me the ID tag on it, so I know what I'm ordering if I'm dealing with that. And that same thing, if I wanted to do that into the sheet, if I go to that cell, hit a Control-V paste, so it's now pasted that information so I can count up how many yardage I want off that. For each cell down here, and notice the title up above here, is going to tell me the thread number, the color number, as well as what the identification tag, what color it really is. And that text string can be up to 60 some odd characters at the moment, depending upon demand. We'll look at changing that. So that gives me the ability of creating and managing the multiple colors, and I can actually see by color name what it is I'm doing with a pattern and move things around. Okay, this will be a description of creating your own palette and keeping track of things. Now in this particular case, I've actually got some color card sample that I'd wound off. So I'd taken an index card, wound color samples on that, and put it into a scanner, since that provides me a pretty clean uniform light. If I hit a copy, and when I can paste that into the image, there's the scanned image. And I'm going to zoom in a bit here, and that's going to average across that area, so I can actually pick that in. And if I call that a purple, now I can drag that up and add that to my color palette. And as I drag up here, okay, now I've got a green, and back that off. And I'm just typing the color name. If you've got more information, it could be where it's stored, it could be which manufacturer, the reference number, or whatever it takes to identify that particular yarn. So in this case, I can actually go through, and I can then go ahead and add those colors to the palette. And assuming I've typed what I want to type in on each one of those, I can create my own palette. If I have existing palettes, I could then go ahead and merge, like I have the Lunatic Fringe palette here, I can drag a color from there, add that in, and the black and white are probably not really colors that are going to be used. So I've now got, things like there's the purple thread, so I can then go ahead and drag and drop those guys. So if I'm doing my own palettes, that's one option. Now the next thing I'd like to look at is if you're looking from a manufacturer, I've got a handful of manufacturer cards here for frame of reference. On the Broussard, when I'd created the template, I'd gone to the cotton and I'd copied that image, and then when I paste the image over here, I can zoom. And now this got a little bit interesting. Let me walk through a little bit more how I'd done what I'd done here. So in this particular case, the color name identification number is all stored in there. And if I do select the entire color segment, it's going to average across that. And what I'd notice is my color samples tend to be a little bit dark. So I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit more and kind of hit the color side. I can now type in the Blanchy, the 101 as an identifier. I can now add that to the color spectrum, and that basically is how the Lunatic, Fringe, and the Broussard color palettes were done. And the trick I find is when you go through them to be pretty careful where you draw it. That was a zoom. If I pull that down a little bit, if I average across the entire thing, you can see the color contents. And if I actually pick the bright spot out here, it shows me a little bit cleaner, a little bit brighter colors. And I especially noticed that on the Lunatic Fringe spectrum, I've got color samples and the fiber itself was a whole lot brighter than what I was seeing on the screen. So that's how that had been done. Now I will admit, when I originally did this, what I'd done is just gone through and created each color, add it, and once I had them all in, I'd then gone back in by hand and edited the WIF file, and I'll talk about how to do that in a couple of minutes too. What I'd found on this, it was very convenient because I had the color sample and the name. But now if I look back over at another sample, and if I open one of the Lunatic Fringe samples, things are a little bit different. I've got the same color samples, but you'll notice it does not have the color names. If I do a mouse over on it, it actually gives me the color names. So in this particular case, what I'd done is a control print screen, and that gives me a print screen. Now when I turn the image off, turn it back on again, I've now got I just saved on the screen, and as I drag it back around, I can now select off the Lunatic Fringe palette. And again, if I look at what happens when I drag the entire box, it's fairly dark. If I grab just the lightest portion of it here, which is what I'd done, it comes out significantly lighter. And in this case, it's a whole lot easier than typing each name, because what I'm going to want to do is pull them all out and then go back in and fill in the colors. Otherwise, I've lost the ability to see what the color name is here. So as I add those to the colors, and again, I just try and do that in some kind of a organized manner, pull whatever portion of the image, and I zoomed these in considerably and scrolled to figure out where my best color samples was. So that's really how I'd done those templates. I see something similar if I go to a distributor sign and I look at their yarn samples. Let me ask for the Marysville just for sake of discussion here. It's very similar to Lunatic Fringe in terms I've got all the color samples, but it takes a mouse over before I get the names of them. The other thing that was interesting about this one is you'll notice a couple of the samples are onto the cones, as well as a few more are offline there. So go back into Quickdraw, close the image. When I reopen, let me pick one of the ones that I had some trouble with down there. So when I zoom in on it, I keep scrolling down to where it is. There it is. I can actually keep zooming that. So I can keep zooming it. Okay, I can get there with the zoom plus and minuses there too. I can actually go through and pull in just a portion of it. So I'm not, if I average across the whole thing, it's going to look at the background color, the cardboard tube, and so forth. So depending upon the image there, I can select just the portion of it I want to. So I can zoom that as much as I want to. So I can pick up any color out of that pattern I want to. And depending upon the type of thread I'm dealing with from the manufacturer, I can select whatever I want to drag and then add that color to my palette. Now the next thing is, if I haven't added the color names yet, what I want to do, if I do a save as a save new palette.wif. So if I look at the new palette file here, I'm just going to open it with notepads. It's the easiest way to do it. When I open that, the color ID table is what I've added. That tells me the names of each associated color. Here's the color palette. In this case, I've added 12 things so far. The color table is the RGB contents. The color IDs here are the names I typed into them. So where I had not corrected that name yet, I can change those to whatever I want it to be. And when I'd actually done the Lunatic Fringe palettes and the Broussard palettes, I'd actually gone through afterwards and change all of these numbers to the appropriate numbers that were on the vendor site so I can move back and forth to the raw text versions. Now, the other thing I may want to be a little bit careful of, some of the weaving software, when it imports the color palette, it looks at the colors that are actually used in the pattern. If it's not in the pattern, it does not include it into the palette. And if I open the Lunatic Fringe palette, again with the notepad, again, I've got the color ID table here, and here's the color table with all the RGBs, 46 entries, and here are all the color names that I had typed in. Now, in this particular case, what I'd also done is for the warp colors, each thread is a different color. So I'd actually type those all in by hand because it was easier than dragging them in with the normal text editor. So I'd done that for the warp colors, done that again for the weft colors, and you could actually just drag those out of here if that's an easier way to do it. And what that then gives me is when I look at the pattern, there's the Lunatic Fringe pattern, each thread is a different color, so I can actually see that. And if I import it into other programs, that'll work. And that gives me the ability to create and manage palettes. Thank you.